Hello and welcome to Westside Electronic Music Tutorials. Today I have David, a professional audio engineer, here to join me to talk about equalizers. We're going to use Logic and a couple Logic loops here to demo those to you today. What I have here is I have a 12-string guitar loop, so we can listen to that, and also a drum loop. And we're going to start with the 12-string guitar loop. Before we do that, though, I want to show you that I have an EQ enabled here in this track. Let's talk about how you enable an EQ in a track. You click on the track, and I'll remove it here so we can see that. And you go over to the channel strip, and you can either click where it says EQ here, or you can click here where it says Audio Effects and pull down the EQ. And we're going to use the channel EQ. Either one of those would work. And then that pops up the EQ plugin. And as we'll recall in Logic, we can hide plugins by closing the window there and then reopen them by clicking down here. Now, before I take you around this EQ, David, why don't you tell us what an EQ is?
An equalizer is a device or a software that allows us to affect the audio spectrum of an instrument or a vocal. We could see our EQ here. I'm going to look over. We've got a looks like an on-off switch to bypass the EQ, just as if it were a piece of hardware. We have some defaults that are used often for things like drums, acoustic guitars, and vocals. On the left side of the display, we have a frequency scale, and you'll see 0 decibels right here in the center, and then positive dB here and negative, so that we can boost or attenuate any part of the sound spectrum. Across the bottom, we have our frequencies, and you could see listed here from 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz. That's generally considered the range of human hearing.
I would also point out here, David, that you notice that those frequencies are not linear. They emphasize, if you look from 20 to, say, 2K, which is kind of the effective musical range,
That's right.
That dominates more of the visual display.
That's right. And we're most sensitive to frequencies in this range, or mid-range, the frequencies of human speech, and I'd say significantly between 1 kilohertz and 5 or 10 kilohertz. Now we've got several different types of filters we could see across the top. They're all color-coded, so we could see when we're engaged with multiple filters that we could see which one clearly that we're working on, and we could use several of these filters simultaneously. To the left here is a filter type that's referred to as a high-pass filter. Now what a high-pass filter does is it cuts out or removes low frequencies and allows high frequencies to pass through completely unaffected. You'll notice there's no change to any frequency above where I'm affecting. I'm controlling what is considered the slope on this filter. Now, here's kind of a gentle slope to it. We're removing some of these lower frequencies. As I hold down and raise the mouse, what happens is my slope becomes more extreme, and it picks up a resonant frequency here.
And let's turn those other filters off so that you can see the effect of just that single filter. There we go.
All right, there's our high pass. Now I'm going to, while we're on the high pass, I think it might benefit us to take a look at the low pass filter. I'll shut this one off, and look how similar that looks. This is very similar in that it allows us to filter out one end of the audio spectrum.
And why don't we listen while we do this to how
Let's
these
do
affect
that.
the guitar track?
Okay. So I'm first going to have us listen to our high-pass filter, and I'll take out some of the low end. Let's hear some of the effect of this resonance on it. You could hear when I'm down here and I'm simply removing frequencies, it's a little more natural sounding, and that when I really purposefully create some resonance around the filter, I could use it for more creative effects. I'm going to engage simultaneously the high pass and low pass filters here, and when I do so, we're creating something called a band pass filter. So I'm going to really limit the area of frequencies of bands that pass through. Anytime we engage simultaneously a high and low pass filter, we've created a band pass filter that allows a narrow band of frequencies to pass. And as you can see, we could use each of these filter types simultaneously. As we move forward, one thing I'm going to do before I do that is I'm going to hit this analyzer button. That's a spectrum analyzer that appears under the audio, and you could see the effects on the sound spectrum of the filter that you're engaging. That's really handy. In fact, it's really great when down here you see, for example, a peaking frequency that's really bugging you. I think we'll have a look at that on our drums. Now, I'm going to disengage this, and let's look at these two filters here. Again, we could tell they're similar, but each of them adjusts both the high and low end. These are referred to as shelving filters. Now, a shelving filter, we can shut that off. A shelving filter, you'll always see at the high and low end of the audio spectrum, and what it allows us to do is to turn up or down either the bass or treble frequencies. If you've ever had a simple set of tone controls, like on a stock car stereo, that's just bass and treble.
The AC Delco Special.
That's right. Those are typically shelving filters, and they were this first type of filters that we use. They allow us to generally have more or less bass or treble frequencies. Let's hear the guitar.
I'd say everybody in my neighborhood, David, likes to have it like this.
I see. Yes. Or the very popular smile on the car stereo. Right. So I'm gonna engage the audio here and the filter, and I'll boost some low end. Not typically something I do on an acoustic here, and maybe we could hear why. But let's reduce some of that.
Right?
Yes, right. And I could get some of that. Sometimes, now even though this is thinned out, and let's remove the filter here. Now I really like that fundamental of the acoustic, and yet if I was working in a multi-track production and I had maybe layered acoustics with electric guitars and other instrumentation, some of the low end of the acoustics might actually interfere with those other instruments being heard clearly. And so we might use a filter like this to just simply remove some of the low end. We've looked at both the pass filters and the shelving filters. Now, if we notice in the center here, we have 4 of the same filter types. It's no coincidence they gave us 4 of these, because these are peaking filters, and they're really regarded as the most sophisticated type of filter.
Should we maybe listen to these on the drum part?
Let's do that.
Okay, so I'm going to close this EQ, and I'm going to go down here to this drum track.
Great.
And we'll solo that one.
And we'll just ensconce an EQ there.
And then here's our EQ. And right now, as I enable an EQ, I'll point out that I could start with some drum presets. But in this case, we're going to start with a, you want to start with a drum preset?
We could do that.
Sure. Okay, so I'm going to go with what they call hi-fi drums. It looks like it just does a whole lot of EQ.
Right. It looks somewhat random to me.
And so I think I'm going to just, on second thought, just go and recall the default, and we can always return to that. Interestingly, if you want to work with 2 EQs, you can always compare your most recent EQs and go back and forth. A few things I want to point out about these particular filters is that when we enable them, they're each color-coded in Logic, and that they have a corresponding numeric display below. So we can adjust them graphically by grabbing them and moving them. Here I'm increasing within that frequency range, or I'm cutting here. We can also adjust the frequency range by moving it this way, but we can do the same by using the numeric displays and adjusting them. And notice that I can play around with bandwidths and whatnot as well here, just as I can here. And that bandwidth, which is also referred to as the Q, enables us to choose a wider or more narrow range. And we're going to listen to the effects of these on the drum part.
It looked like when you soloed the drums that the acoustic was still soloed, by the way.
Yep. Oh, nope.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
I was that.
All right, so here we go. Let's try it. Here we go. All right, so let's play with this.
Let's do. First, we might have a desire to bring up some low end. Now, we could really sweep through and find.
Do we want to look at the analyzer?
Some of the lows there. And you can see I've sort of found that frequency of the bass in there. I'm going to take a look at this Q couple and assume that we have some proportional Q here. Let's see. Let's bring up, I'm going to find the frequency. I'll use this peak to find the frequency around the snare. Now I've selected a rather wide Q or bandwidth there, so let's limit that amount of bandwidth. I'll find just that. That's gets a lot of the area of the snare there, and then I'll widen up around there. Now, I hear some hi-hat components in here, and let's assume that we would like to reduce those hi-hat sounds. I'm going to use something we refer to as kind of seek and destroy on a fully parametric filter here. And I've got a wide area selected there, so I'm going to take my bandwidth and narrow it. And let's find a little bit more of that hi-hat. There it is. Let me narrow that bandwidth even more. Now I'm doing this so that I'm really focused on that center frequency, and I gotta tell you, Doug, that really helps out a lot, being able to see that spectrum analysis just below it.
Oh yeah, I use it all the time.
I know it seems strange that I'm boosting to remove the hi-hat, but I was just doing that to sort of find it, and now I'm gonna cut. All right, let's see our, take that in and out. There's our increase around the snare, and although we're increasing the snare generally, I'm doing a little bit of reduction on the hat. Let's hear that again. All right, and if we brought up some of our bass, I'm going to make that just a little wider. I'll bring some life to the track without being too aggressive with the hi-hat.
One thing I would point out here too that's a nice feature of this particular EQ is that we also have a gain stage here, so I could bring up or down that entire EQ curve we've created and still keep that profile.
Great.
Well, I think that sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
What if we put that with our acoustic guitar?
Okay.
Well, I don't think that's going to win a Grammy Award.
No.
I think it does a pretty good job demonstrating EQ. Thank you for checking out Westside EM Tutorials. And thank you, David.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.